I was 12 years old when my mother told me we couldn't afford a vacation. 2 years later, I watched her board a plane to the Bahamas without me. Back then, all I had was a permission slip on the kitchen table. $20 for a school trip to Washington, D.C. One night in a youth hostel. Packed lunches. That was it. She didn't even look up when she said no. Just shrugged like she was talking about the weather. We can't afford it, sweetie. Money's tight. We were sitting in our cramped apartment, the kind where you could hear the neighbors fighting through the walls. I nodded, folded the paper, and learned my first real lesson about money in our house. We weren't broke. We can't afford it, sweetie, she said, not looking up from her phone. Money's tight right now. I nodded. I always nodded. What else was I supposed to do? If this story sounds familiar, if you've ever been told we can't afford it while watching others live without limits, hit that like button and subscribe. This one gets deeper than you think. My mother wasn't a bad person. That's what I told myself for years. She was just complicated. After my father left when I was 5, she raised me alone. Or at least that's the narrative she preferred. The truth was messy. She worked part-time at a salon, did nails mostly, and the rest of the time she was with Derek. Derek was her boyfriend of 4 years. He had a good job, something in sales, and he dressed well. Button-down shirts, leather shoes that clicked on tile floors. He smiled at me sometimes, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, and called me kiddo, in a voice that made my skin crawl. But my mother loved him or needed him or both. I never quite figured out which. The thing about being a kid in a struggling household is that you learn to make yourself small. You learn not to ask for things. You learn that your needs are secondary, negotiable, often invisible. I wore the same 3 outfits to school in rotation. I did my homework at the public library because our internet was spotty. I ate school lunch and then came home to ramen or whatever was on sale that week. And I never complained. Not once. Because my mother had made it clear. We were broke. Money was tight. We were barely getting by. Except Derek always had a new watch. Except my mother got her hair done professionally every 6 weeks. Came home with shopping bags from stores I'd only seen in the mall we couldn't afford to shop at. Except they went out to dinner every Friday night while I stayed home with a frozen pizza. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I was 12, then 13, then 14. What was I going to do? Confront her? Demand an accounting of the household budget? I had no power. I had no choice. So I stayed quiet and I survived, and I told myself that maybe I was wrong. Maybe hair appointments were necessities. Maybe those dinners were rare treats. Maybe I just didn't understand how adult finances worked. The summer I turned 15, my best friend Jasmine invited me to go to Six Flags with her family. Her mom even offered to pay my way, just $40 for the ticket. They'd cover food. It was kind. It was generous. It was the first time in years someone had offered me something without conditions. I asked my mother that night after dinner when she was in a good mood. Derek was there, sprawled on our couch like he owned it, watching a basketball game. Mom, Jasmine's family invited me to Six Flags next weekend. Her mom said she'd pay for my ticket. Can I go? My mother frowned, not at me but at the TV. I don't know, honey. That's a long day. And what if something happens? What if you need money for something? Her mom said she'd cover everything. I still don't like the idea of you being dependent on other people's charity. She said it like charity was a dirty word. We're not a charity case. Derek didn't even look at me. Just tell her no, babe. Kid doesn't need to be running around amusement parks. She's got homework, right? It was June. School was out. My mother nodded slowly like he'd made a brilliant point. Yeah, maybe next year, sweetie. When we're in a better place financially. I went to my room and cried into my pillow quietly so they wouldn't hear. 2 weeks later, I came home from the library to an empty apartment. There was a note on the counter in my mother's looping handwriting. Gone to the Bahamas with Derek for the week. Mrs. Chin next door has my number if you need anything. Food money in the jar. Love you. The jar had $60 in it. They'd gone to the Bahamas. I stood there for a long time staring at that note, feeling something crack open inside my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, sharper. It was the understanding that I had been lied to. Not in the casual way adults sometimes lie to children, but systematically, deliberately for years. We weren't broke. We'd never been broke. I was broke. I was the one who couldn't afford things. They could. They just chose not to spend it on me. I was 15 years old and I learned that day what it meant to be unwanted in your own home. Not neglected in the obvious ways. I had food, shelter, a bed. But unwanted in the ways that mattered. Unconsidered. Unimportant. A line item in the budget that could always be cut. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? Jasmine? Her family already pitied me enough. Nature? What would I even say? My mom went on vacation without me and I feel sad about it? Sounded ridiculous. It sounded like something a spoiled kid would complain about. So I swallowed it. I added it to the growing list of things I wasn't allowed to feel hurt by. Right now, some of you are feeling this in your bones. You know what it's like to be the one left behind. Drop a comment if this hits home. Let's talk about it. The next 3 years were a study in endurance. I got a part-time job at 16 working at a grocery store after school. I saved every penny. Not for college. I'd already accepted I'd be going to community college if anywhere, but for escape. For the day I could leave and never come back. My mother noticed the money, of course. Suddenly she needed help with rent. Suddenly the utilities were behind. Suddenly, it was only fair that I contribute since I was practically an adult and living under her roof. Derek never contributed to these conversations. He just watched, arms crossed, nodding along like a silent enforcer. I paid. What choice did I have? I was 17, still in high school, still legally her responsibility. She held all the cards. But I kept some money aside. I hid it in the lining of an old teddy bear, $20 at a time. It was slow. It was painful. Every time I handed her money that should have been mine, I felt that crack in my chest widen a little more. I graduated high school with decent grades and an acceptance letter to the local community college. No celebration, no party, no gift. My mother said congratulations, distracted while scrolling through her phone. Derek grunted from the couch. 3 days later they left for Vegas. They were gone for 5 days. When they came back, my mother complained about losing money at the slots, laughed about it like it was funny, like it was just bad luck. I calculated silently in my head. A 5-day trip to Vegas, hotel, food, gambling money. Probably $2,000 minimum. My entire college fund, the one I'd scraped together myself, was $800. That was the summer I stopped waiting for things to get better. I stopped believing in next year, or when we're in a better place. I started planning for real. I took extra shifts. I picked up babysitting gigs. I sold things I didn't need. By the time I turned 18, I had $1,500 saved. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was mine and it was a start. I moved out 3 weeks after my 18th birthday. I didn't tell my mother I was leaving until the day before. I just said I'd found a room to rent closer to campus, that it would be easier for school. She barely reacted, just shrugged and said, "Okay, if that's what you want." Derek looked relieved. The room was tiny in a house with 4 other students, and my bedroom was barely large enough for a twin bed and a desk. But it was mine. The door locked from the inside. No one could take anything from me without my permission. I worked full-time and went to school part-time. It took me 5 years to get my associate degree. 5 years of exhaustion, of choosing between textbooks and groceries, of sleeping 4 hours a night and showing up to class with dark circles under my eyes. But I did it. I walked across that stage, accepted my diploma, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not in my mother's approval. I'd long stopped seeking that, but in my own resilience. In my own quiet, stubborn refusal to quit. My mother didn't come to the graduation. She said she had to work, but I saw on Facebook later that week that she and Derek had gone to Napa Valley for a wine tasting weekend. I stopped checking her Facebook after that. I got a job as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit. The pay was modest, barely above minimum wage, but it was stable and it came with benefits. Health insurance. Paid time off. Small things that felt enormous when you'd never had them before. Kept my head down. I worked hard. I lived simply, saved carefully, and slowly, painfully built a life that felt like it belonged to me. Years passed. I didn't see my mother often. Phone calls on birthdays, brief text exchanges on holidays. She never asked how I was doing, not really. The conversations were surface level, performative. She'd tell me about her life. Derek got a promotion, they were remodeling the kitchen, they were thinking about getting a dog, and I'd make appropriate noises of interest. I never told her about my life. She never asked. By the time I turned 25, I'd been promoted twice at work. I was managing donor relations, coordinating fundraising events, learning skills I never imagined I'd have. I still wasn't wealthy. Nonprofit salaries aren't known for their generosity, but I was stable, secure. I had a small apartment I could afford on my own. I had a savings account with actual money in it. I had a life. And then one Tuesday in March my phone rang. It was my mother. "Hi, sweetie," she said, and there was something in her voice I didn't recognize at first. Something brittle. "How are you?" "I'm fine." "What's going on?" There was a pause. Can't a mother just call her daughter to catch up? She'd never done that before. Not once in 7 years. "Mom, what do you need?" Another pause, longer this time. "It's Derek. We broke up." I waited. "He left me. For someone else. Someone younger." Her voice cracked. "And he took everything. The savings we had together, it was in his name, and he emptied the account and left. I can't afford the rent on the apartment by myself. I'm in trouble, honey. There was the ask. The reason for the call. I'm sorry that happened, I said carefully. That sounds really hard. I was wondering if maybe I could stay with you for a while. Just until I get back on my feet. I could sleep on the couch, I wouldn't be in the way. No. The word came out flat, final. Silence on the other end. What do you mean, no? I mean, no, Mom. You can't stay with me. But I'm your mother. I raised you. You can't just. You raised me. The laugh that came out of me was harsh, unexpected. You gave me a place to sleep and the bare minimum of food. You told me we were broke for my entire childhood while you went on vacation after vacation with Derek. You made me believe we had nothing while you spent money on everything except me. That's not fair. You didn't come to my high school graduation. You didn't help me pay for college. You didn't ask how I was doing when I moved out at 18 with $1,500 to my name. You didn't care, Mom. You just didn't care. I did care. I was doing my best. You have no idea how hard it was to raise a kid alone. You weren't alone. You had Derek. And you chose him every single time. You chose his vacations and his comfort and his presence over anything I ever needed. Her voice turned cold. So this is how it is. Your own mother asks for help and you turn your back on her. Yes, I said quietly. That's exactly how it is. You're heartless. You're cruel. Maybe. Or maybe I learned from the best. I hung up. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. I felt sick and exhilarated and terrified all at once. I'd just done something I'd never allowed myself to do before. I'd said no to my mother. I'd told her the truth. I'd refused to make myself small. She called back 6 times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails. Angry, then pleading, then angry again. I deleted them without listening all the way through. A week later, I got a call from my Aunt Linda, my mother's older sister. We weren't close, I barely knew her, but she'd somehow gotten my number. Your mother is staying with me temporarily, she said without preamble. She told me you refused to help her. That's right. She said you were very cruel to her. I told her the truth. There was a long pause. She also told me you blamed her for not taking you on vacations when you were a kid. She told me we were too broke to afford anything. For years. And then she'd disappear for long weekends with her boyfriend, spending thousands of dollars. Yeah, I blamed her for that. Another pause. I didn't know that. Most people don't. For what it's worth, Aunt Linda said slowly, your mother has always been very good at playing the victim. Even when we were kids. She'd start a fight and then cry about how everyone was being mean to her. I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not saying you have to help her, Aunt Linda continued. I'm just saying, I believe you. About what happened. And I'm sorry no one protected you from it. I had to sit down. Thank you, I whispered. She can stay here for a month. After that she'll need to figure something else out. I'm not enabling her either. We hung up. I sat in my small apartment in the silence and cried. Not because I was sad but because for the first time in my life, someone had believed me without question. Someone had taken my side. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this. Stories like this don't get told enough. Hit that subscribe button if you want more real talk about surviving family dysfunction. This channel is for all of us. 2 months passed. I heard through Aunt Linda that my mother had moved into a cheaper apartment across town, gotten a second job at a retail store. I felt nothing about it. Not satisfaction, not guilt. Just nothing. I focused on my work. On my life. On building something that felt solid and real. And then, on a random Thursday in June, I took a trip. It was for work. Our nonprofit was sending a small team to a conference in San Francisco. My boss had asked if I wanted to go and I'd said yes immediately. It was my first work trip, my first time on a plane in years. I was nervous and excited in equal measure. I got to the airport early, checked my bag, went through security. I found my gate and sat down, pulling out a book to pass the time. And that's when I saw her. My mother. Standing in line at the gate across from mine. For a moment I thought I was hallucinating. But no, it was definitely her. Same hair, darker now with fresh dye. Same posture, shoulders back, chin up. She was laughing at something, her head tilted back. And standing next to her with his hand on her lower back, was a man I didn't recognize. Not Derek. Someone new. He was older, silver-haired, wearing an expensive-looking polo shirt. They were holding first-class boarding passes. I watched, frozen, as they boarded the plane. Watched them disappear down the jetway, still laughing, still casual, still utterly unaware of me sitting 30 feet away. My flight was called 20 minutes later. I boarded in Zone 3, walked past first class to my middle seat in economy, stuffed my carry-on in the overhead bin, and sat down between a businessman on his laptop and a college student with headphones. I stared at the seat in front of me and felt that old, familiar crack in my chest open wider. 2 months. It had been 2 months since she'd called me desperate, broke, claiming she had nothing. 2 months since she'd asked to sleep on my couch because she couldn't afford rent. And here she was. In first class. With a new man. Going on vacation. The pattern hadn't changed. He just found a new Derek. I could have gotten up. I could have walked to first class, confronted her, demanded answers. I could have made a scene, could have asked her how she afforded those tickets, could have thrown her words back in her face. But I didn't. Because I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. My mother's lies weren't about money. They'd never been about money. They were about control. About keeping me small, keeping me grateful for scraps, keeping me from asking for what I deserved. As long as she could convince me we were broke, she could justify giving me nothing while taking everything for herself. And the cruelest part was that she probably believed her own lies. In her mind, she was struggling. She was doing her best. Because in her world, my needs didn't count. They were invisible, negotiable, expendable. I'd spent my entire childhood and adolescence trying to understand why I wasn't enough. Why I didn't deserve the things she gave freely to Derek and now this new man, whoever he was. But sitting there in seat 24B, 30,000 feet in the air, I finally got it. It was never about me. It was never about whether I deserved love or care or investment. It was about her inability to see me as a person who mattered. And that inability? That was her failure, not mine. The plane landed. I got off, collected my bag, took a taxi to the hotel. I checked in, went to my room and stood at the window looking out at the San Francisco skyline. I didn't see my mother at baggage claim. I didn't see her in the hotel lobby later that week. We were in the same city, maybe even the same neighborhood, and we might as well have been on different planets. The conference was good. I learned a lot, made connections, impressed my boss. On the last night, the team went out to dinner at a nice restaurant. Not fancy but nice, and my boss picked up the bill. He toasted us, thanked us for our hard work, told us we were valuable. I thought about my mother, somewhere in this city, probably at a nicer restaurant than this one, with her new boyfriend who was paying for everything. And I thought, I'm glad I'm here instead. Here's what I want you to understand. Survival isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes we all need permission to walk away. I flew home on Sunday. Went back to work on Monday. Kept living my small, quiet, hard-won life. 3 weeks later, Aunt Linda called me again. I thought you should know, she said. Your mother's new boyfriend? Apparently he's married. His wife found out about the affair and kicked him out. Now he's broke, fighting a divorce, and he can't afford to keep supporting your mother. Hey, I said. She called me crying yesterday. Said she can't believe this happened to her again. Okay, I said again. She asked if I thought you'd help her now. I almost laughed. What did you tell her? I told her she should have thought about that before she spent 18 years treating you like you didn't matter. Thank you. She's going to call you, Aunt Linda warned. Probably soon. She's desperate. I won't answer. Good. My mother did call. 3 times that week, 4 times the next. I let every call go to voicemail. I listened to the first one out of morbid curiosity. It was the same script as before. She was sorry, she was struggling, couldn't I please just help her out, didn't I care about her at all? I deleted the rest without listening. A month later, I saw on Facebook, through a mutual acquaintance since I'd unfriended her years ago, that she'd moved back in with Aunt Linda temporarily. She looked older in the profile picture. Tired. Smaller somehow. I felt something then, finally. Not satisfaction. I wasn't glad she was suffering. But not guilt either. Just a quiet, settled certainty that I'd made the right choice. Because here's what I'd learned, slowly, painfully, over years of surviving. You cannot save someone who refuses to see what they've done. You cannot love someone into treating you with basic decency. You cannot sacrifice yourself enough to make someone else whole. All you can do is survive. Build your own life. Protect your own peace. And sometimes, the most powerful form of justice is simply refusing to participate in your own mistreatment anymore. I never spoke to my mother again after that. Not because I was punishing her, but because I'd finally learned what my boundaries were and what they meant. She'd shown me, clearly and consistently, that she saw me as a resource to be used rather than a person to be loved. And I'd finally learned that I deserved better than that. Years later, I'm 30 now, I sometimes think about what would have happened if I'd said yes. If I'd let her move in, supported her financially, tried once again to earn the love she'd never been capable of giving. I'd be exactly where she always wanted me. Small, struggling, giving everything and getting nothing, convinced that my value lay only in my usefulness to her. Instead, I'm here. I have a job I'm good at, work that matters. I have friends who show up for me the way I show up for them. I have a small apartment that's entirely mine, decorated with things I chose, filled with peace I built myself. I have a life she never thought I deserved. And that's the real ending to this story. Not revenge, not vindication, not her falling apart without me. Just me surviving. Thriving even. Building something good out of the broken pieces she left me with. I saw her one more time 2 years ago by accident in a grocery store. I was picking up vegetables for dinner. She was in the checkout line ahead of me buying cigarettes and lottery tickets with crumpled bills. She looked older. Harder. More worn down. She didn't see me. I didn't say anything. I just watched her leave, getting into a beat-up car I didn't recognize, and then I went back to my shopping. Later, driving home, I realized I didn't feel anything. Not anger, not pity, not the old desperate longing for her to suddenly become the mother I'd needed. Just nothing. She was a stranger who happened to share some DNA with me. That was all she'd ever been, really. I just spent too many years trying to convince myself otherwise. That night, I cooked myself dinner in my small kitchen. I ate at my small table looking out at the city lights. I did the dishes, made tea, curled up with a book. And I was happy. Not in the dramatic, triumphant way you see in movies. Not because I'd defeated her or proven something. Just happy. In the quiet, hard-won way of someone who'd survived something that should have broken them and came out whole on the other side. The girl who was told she couldn't afford a $20 school trip had grown into a woman who could afford her own plane tickets. Who could take her own vacations even if they were modest ones. Who could choose her own life. And that girl, that woman, she didn't need her mother's approval anymore. Didn't need her mother's love. Didn't need her mother at all. Because she'd learned the truth that had been there all along, waiting for her to be strong enough to accept it. She'd always been enough. Just as she was. Just as she is. The poverty was never in our bank account. It was in my mother's heart. And I'd spent my whole life trying to fill that emptiness, not realizing that the only person who could do that was her. Now I save my energy for people who see my value. For work that matters. For a life built on truth instead of lies. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that 12-year-old girl sitting at the kitchen table with a permission slip, being told no for the 1,000th time. I think about how small she felt. How invisible. And I wish I could go back and tell her, hold on. Keep going. One day you'll be free. One day you'll take yourself on all the trips she said you couldn't afford. One day you'll realize that the only person you needed to believe in you was yourself. And that day you'll finally stop waiting for her permission to live. Thank you for reading this to the end. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you know someone who's still waiting for permission from people who'll never give it, share this with them. Sometimes we all need to hear, you're allowed to save yourself. I'm 30 now, like I said. I have a life I chose. Piece by piece, paycheck by paycheck, boundary by boundary, I built something that's mine. My mother is somewhere out there, probably still looking for someone to rescue her, still convinced the world owes her something. I hope she finds peace someday. I really do. But whether she does or doesn't, it's not my problem anymore. And that, more than anything else, is the freedom I spent 25 years fighting for. The freedom to live a life where her choices don't determine my worth. The freedom to say, I survived you. I survived poverty, manipulation, and emotional abandonment. I survived being told I didn't matter. Now I'm proof that you were wrong. Not because I'm rich or successful in flashy ways. But because I'm happy. Because I'm whole. Because I learned that the opposite of being broken isn't being perfect. It's being free. That's the real revenge, living well without her. Building a life she can't touch. Becoming someone she never believed I could be. And the best part? I didn't do it for her. I didn't do it to prove anything to her. I did it for me. And that makes all the difference. Subscribe.